Now, I don't know about you, but if I had a choice that 2020 could be over or I could spend 3 weeks on the rack, a bed of nails, I don't know what I'd choose. Which one is worse? 2020 just coming to a natural end or me on a bed of nails? Now, I know a lot of my detractors might say it might be good to have Glenn on a bed of nails, but it's my New Year resetting, not yours. It's been an exhausting year, hasn't it? Can you believe it's the first time I heard about COVID in Botswana? What was the name of that city in
Wuhan?
In China.
Botswana?
Yeah,
What?
No, I said Botswana.
Oh, okay. Wuhan, the wonderful vacation destination.
Capital of the world. It really is I mean, who doesn't want to go there and have bats? So it was Christmas. It was over the Christmas vacation. I think December 10th or 17th was the first time it broke. I heard it around Christmas, maybe the 20th, 24th, something like that. And I just rolled my eyes and I'm like, would people stop eating bats? Can we stop selling them in these open markets? Notice nobody's talking about open markets anymore. I wonder why. But it was a year ago. It was 10 months since we shut everything down. And we said, yeah, I'll do 2 weeks. We could, hey, let's pull together. Let's do 2 weeks, huh? And then they said, well, maybe another 2 weeks. Okay, well, I don't like that as much, but okay, I'll do it. After those 2 weeks, I don't know, it might be, let's get through spring and into summer, because then it'll probably, okay, we'll do that in the summer. Well, we want to keep it up because, kids got to go back to school, and we're not sure. And then in August, kids aren't going back to school. Looks like we're getting into the flu season. When does this stop? More importantly, the people that we talked about yesterday, the small business person, they're being destroyed. And they're being destroyed, I believe, intentionally. And what I learned from talking to these 3 entrepreneurs yesterday is until they heard each other's voices, they felt pretty alone. Until they had someone like me, I mean, that's how bad things are. Someone like me to talk to them so they could have America hear their plight, they didn't think anybody cared. How easily we fall into lies. We raised almost $200,000 from an hour yesterday for these small businesses. And I can't thank you enough for being so generous. You can still go to glennbeck.com and go to the GoFundMe page if you'd like to donate. But I have to tell you, yesterday I heard it. When I was talking to the last entrepreneur up in Boston, and he said, I can't believe the guy you had on in California, he has it right. He was saying the same thing. And here's 2 cities, 2 different states, different, as far away as you can get. We're all feeling the same way, I think. There's a survey that's just come out that asked Americans about their experiences with 2020. It's not going to come as a surprise to you. 77% agree 2020 has sent the U.S. into crisis, but crisis over its identity. Isn't that interesting? It's not a crisis just of COVID. It's a crisis of identity. We don't know who we are anymore. Sad, but true. Baby boomers are the most likely to agree with that statement with 82. compared to 76% of Generation X, 75% of millennial respondents. But as we're dealing with these issues, 65% of respondents say they feel like they've had their own personal crisis, at least at some point during this year. 68%, darn near 70% of this country, say this year has left them now feeling defeated. That's not a good place to be. Because we are what we think we are. That's why we're having a crisis of identity, because we've always thought we're Americans. We get the job done. We're entrepreneurs. We kick ass. Now we don't know. Let me tell you something. We're Americans. We don't like leashes. We don't like fences. We don't like being told what to do. We go in and we kick ass and we get the job done. Not because we have some grand ruler, but because that's who we are. Let me tell you a story. It's winter. It's 1777. It's an unusually harsh winter. British forces had just captured the United States Capitol in Philadelphia. George Washington and his men tried, but they couldn't retake the city. 11,000 of the survivors, he took them with no shoes, feet wrapped in rags, to just outside of the city. It's a long way. It seems really close if you're driving. But if you don't have the highway, Valley Forge is a long walk, especially without shoes in the snow. It was December 19th that the Continental Army and George Washington would change the course of history and reverse the course of the war, which was not going well for America. He ordered his men build wood huts. You need shelter. We're going to stay here for the long winter months. He had hoped that his brave patriots with one heart and one mind would overcome the tribulation that was ahead of them, but they couldn't. It's not going well. The last Christmas, many of them had spent crossing the icy waters of the Delaware. This Christmas, they all were afraid they would starve to death before anything could happen. Congress didn't care about the conditions at Valley Forge or thought that Washington was exaggerating. Either way, they didn't do anything. The men, along with 500 women and children who were accompanying them in the snow, all malnourished, battle-weary, discouraged, feeling betrayed by Congress. Can you relate to any of these things? As they arrive and they're so beaten down, Washington's quartermaster said, "We only have 25 barrels of flour and only a few pounds of salt pork, and there's 11,000 people here." With Congress unresponsive to Washington, he took his case to a higher authority. And in humility and in faith and in strength of the knowledge of knowing who he was and what God was asking him to do, he knelt in the snowy woods at Valley Forge and he pleaded out loud with God for wisdom and strength. Help us, Lord. Help me understand what you want me to do. Now, a lot of people would say this is hogwash. You don't know about history. How could you know what he prayed about? Because he prayed out loud, and hiding in the woods was a man named Isaac Potts. He's the owner of the land at Valley Forge. He was also a Tory. He was on the side of the king. He didn't trust this George Washington. He said it was the most distressing time of the war. Everyone was about to give up the ship, except for that man, George Washington. He said, I was in the woods, and I saw a horse, and I saw a guy get down on his knees, and then I heard a sound as of a man at prayer. I tied my horse to a sapling, and I went quietly into the woods. And much to my surprise, I saw the great George Washington on his knees alone with his sword on one side and his cocked hat on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching to interpose with his divine aid. It was a crisis, the cause of the country, of humanity, of the world. Such a prayer I had never heard from the lips of man. In fact, we know this is true because after he heard it, Isaac Potts ran home or got into his horse and rode as fast as he could. He burst into his own cabin there at Valley Forge, and he said, "Dear God, sweetheart, we are on the wrong side." She said, "What?" These were firm supporters of the king. He said, "I just heard George Washington's prayer, and any man who speaks to God like that, God will listen to." So how does this end? So Isaac Potts had just run into the house and told his wife, we're on the wrong side. We have got to support the new American government because they are righteous. They are truly trying to do the will of God. And God's going to move upon this army. Washington, in the meantime, didn't know Isaac Potts was in the woods. He gets up, brushes his pants off, brushes all the snow off of him. And with great resolve, he goes back to his tent. He pens a letter to Congress about the direness of the situation. It's Christmas Eve. He hears a commotion outside it. He leaves his tent without his coat or his hat. And around the fires, his men were all huddled together, and they were making merry as best they could for Christmas. And Washington joined them. He wished every man there a Merry Christmas. And there in the harshest of conditions, his men cheered, "Long live the United States! Hail to our chief! May liberty prevail!" It wouldn't be the last time, but it was one of the first, and the first his men had ever seen him moved to tears. He watched his brave men brave the elements. He asked them, "Had you not suffered enough?" The lieutenant said, "Haven't come this far? I mean, why not go the rest of the distance?" He returned to his tent, amazed to see that while he was gone, joining in the fellowship, some of his men had gathered garlands of holly and cedar to decorate the outside of his tent. He turned to his men and said, "May God relieve your sufferings. If the Congress will not, God will. Merry Christmas." Well, I want you to know that the clouds didn't part and God had the sunshine shine on Valley Forge. It didn't. Things didn't change on that Christmas, 1777. But from the depths of that Christmas came a resurgence in the hope and confidence of George Washington and his men. Today, we are not standing out in the cold with our feet bound in bandages, alone, malnourished. But if we look around, I think we'll notice that we are surrounded by brave patriots, the same kind of patriots that were there at Valley Forge. And it is a Christmas and a holiday time unlike any of us, most of us, have ever seen. And we do feel alone. We feel abandoned, disillusioned, starved for closeness and companionship. None of us know what waits for us over the horizon. But I mean, geez, we've come this far. Let's just finish it off and do it right. Because the reward is worth the struggle. Let's huddle together however we can, on Zoom, on the internet, with each other, and make merry this Christmas, remembering that Christ is our Savior, remembering that our liberty is preserved because we endure for it. We live for it. So Merry Christmas. Long live the United States. Hail to our chief. And may liberty prevail.